As you noticed, nailing of the proximal humerus is probably not your first thought. Thus, as our prior speaker didn't even mention it in his talk. But yeah, so pneumonia is real, man. It's something serious. So let's talk about nailing proximal humerus fractures. Do I push it?
Just hit the mouse, it should go.
All right. I have nothing to disclose. I'm not that fancy. Just a simple traumatologist. So I think that the complications that arise in a lot of surgeries, as we all are aware of, is typically the technique that we're utilizing is probably not the right technique for us. And so it's what you're good at, what you know well, and what you do well is probably what you should do, right? And that's kind of the same concept. I think nailing in the past has kind of gotten a very sour taste in some people's mouths, mostly because we forget the whole concept that you need a reduction. So you can't just throw a nail in something and expect it to heal, and that goes with tibias, that goes with femurs, that goes with anything else that we nail on the regular. You still need to reduce the fracture. And such, we still need to abide by the same proximal humerus guidelines, and that tuberosities need to be brought back down and secured in some fashion. So oftentimes, if nailing a proximal humerus fracture, a mini lateral approach is sufficient to help you achieve some reduction. You can rotate the humerus to get to the subscap, and you can get to the greater very easily. You also will have a good visualization of the of your starting point, which is kind of important, as that is the typical complex complication that everybody cites. And K-wires are very useful in this situation, and recommend utilizing those when necessary. So newer nail designs. So initially, the first proximal humerus nail I had ever placed was when I was a resident, and it was the Stryker proximal humerus nail. I'm not advocating for one or the other, but I come from Louisville, so Stryker is kind of our home base. But it literally was just the same like it was the same nail that we used for everything else, and they added an additional proximal screw, and that was about it. So it really wasn't consistent with what was necessary for proximal humerus nailing of any significance. So thus, a lot of companies have made different design techniques allowing for better screw purchase, locations of the screws. As we all know, proximal humeri and many other fractures patterns, for that matter, happen in a very classic method. And so we typically have the same pieces we're dealing with, and they have to go back in the same place. Apologies. So thus, we're just trying to put the pieces back together, and now we have better techniques to do that. So there are straight nails for those who are advocates of avoiding the rotator cuff insertion. And then there are more locking features, and even more variability within those locking features, and more shaft extension screws, allowing for much more screw purchase and opportunities for screws as needed. Sorry. So thus, it is minimally invasive. So if you have a very elderly and frail person, but also has polytrauma, more extremity injuries, and needs something to, mobilize, or if it's really displaced, this is a much more minimally invasive. If you do this regularly, it becomes very speedy. It can be very rapid, less suture management issues. If there's a lot of sports guys in here, then maybe you're really good at that. And then, of course, your axillary nerve is not as much at risk. And then, like I just discussed, there's a lot of different options for tuberosity capture. And I have a colleague who does this more regular than I do, and he allows them to weight bear on it, which allows for mobilization of these elderly individuals that require walkers. which we know can be devastating if not. So all the literature, as the previous gentleman said to me, prior to me, there's a million different new studies out there that essentially say that, I think there was a recent one from December, published in December of 2018, where it's a randomized control trial between the two, ORF and nailing, with essentially the exact same comparable outcomes. I think that this again goes back to the fact that if it's what you know, or it's good in your hands, or it can't be good in your hands, then it will have a good outcome or a comparable outcome. I don't think that good outcomes in proximal humori truly exist. And then, as I stated, comparable. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Brandi. Really well done.